Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about Spad.neXt, and I want to talk about the Elgato Stream Deck, and specifically I want to talk about how you can use Spad to program your Stream Deck to control your simulator. Now, if you're not familiar with Spad.neXt, you're going to find some of this video potentially confusing, so I'd suggest you watch some of the initial tutorial videos first to understand a bit more about what Spad.neXt is, what it does, and how it does it. I have made a video on that topic myself, although if I'm being honest it's a bit long and rambly, but you can find plenty of good resources on YouTube if you search for Spad and introduction. So, if you go away and do that, I'll wait. Are you back? Excellent. Okay, let's continue. So, if you're not familiar with the Stream Deck, I've got you covered for that. This is the Stream Deck, or more specifically the Stream Deck XL, which is the largest version of the device. It's a button box with 32 different buttons, and each of those buttons can have a different graphical image assigned to it. Basically, there's a screen sitting behind all those buttons, and that's divided into individual 80 by 80 pixel areas, which can be filled using software with pretty much whatever you want. Now, Elgato supplies their own software with the Stream Deck, unsurprisingly, to let you set it up and use it, but Spad.neXt and also Axis and O's has the capability to override that software and program the Stream Deck directly to connect it to your sim. Now, aside from the Stream Deck XL, there is also the classic Stream Deck, which has 15 buttons, and that is now available in a second version. And there is the Stream Deck Mini, which has 6 buttons. I have 2 of those in my cockpit down on my pedestal. I also have a Stream Deck XL, which I use to control OBS, for example, which I'm doing right now to make this recording. And that's really the reason that the Stream Deck was created in the first place, for streamers and people producing video content to be able to easily switch between scenes and control devices and effects and so on and so forth. So it wasn't really intended for use with a flight simulator. And then most recently there is the Stream Deck Plus. I don't have one of these and I've never seen or used one, but basically it's a Stream Deck with 8 buttons, and then additionally it's got 4 knobs, and it has the LCD bar that you can see, which I believe is also touch sensitive, where you can display values and potentially turn some of those areas into buttons as well. And I know that Spad and also Axis and O's supports all 4 of those models, including the Stream Deck Plus. So, getting back to Spad, what we need to do now is go and look and see how the Stream Deck is configured in Spad. But before we do that, let's just take a moment to have a look at the Elgato software. So I'm going to bring that up right now. And there it is. So at the moment it's focused on one of my Stream Deck Minis, but you can see it knows about all 3 devices that I have attached to my machine. So here's my Stream Deck XL, and this is just the default profile. You can have many different profiles, each with different sets of buttons, and you can switch between them. In terms of what you can do with this software, you have lots of plugins that you can see down the right hand side here. So that's things like controls for OBS Studio or Streamlabs Desktop, for Twitter streaming, for Twitch streaming, and various other things like system controls, keyboard hotkeys, which you could in theory bind to sim functions, but that's not really the way that you want to be using this. You can assign a new key by just literally dragging and dropping, so I could make this key now function as an OBS record key. I already have one of those, so I shall get rid of that. And you can get additional plugins that do different things and automate different applications from the Elgato store and elsewhere. And it's worth noting that there's a thing called Pilot's Deck, which is a plugin for the Elgato software that will connect the Stream Deck to your simulator and let you do quite a lot of things. If you only have the use case for a Stream Deck with the sim and you don't really have any other controllers that you would need something like Spad for, this might be a perfectly adequate solution for you. So I'd recommend you go and check that out before you invest too much time in something like Spad, because it can be a little bit more complex when you get into it. And I'll leave a link to the Pilot's Deck software at Flight Sim 2, and it is free to download in the notes for the video below. But Other than that, the only other reason that you need to care about the Elgato software is because of the potential for clashes. Now, I mentioned I don't use my Stream Deck XL to control my sim, so I'm happy having all these buttons assigned, but my two Stream Deck Minis I do use to control the sim, and what I don't want is any kind of clash between the two pieces of software. Now, if you look at my picture-in-picture here, you can see I can see both of the Stream Decks, and this is the one that's on the left. Now, if I were to search for the hotkey button type and then drag that over to the top left key, you can see in the picture-in-picture that that's displaying that logo now, and it would function as a hotkey when I pressed it. And if you have that bound in the Elgato software and you also attempt to program that button with Spad.next, you can get basically a clash between the two where the Elgato software overrides Spad.next and suddenly those functions don't work anymore because it's trying to do something else. And by default, when you plug in a new Stream Deck, the Elgato software will add a bunch of keyboard shortcuts to all of the buttons, just I guess as a demo as to what you can do. So remember, if you're going to use a Stream Deck purely for programming your sim, you want to go through in the Elgato software and remove any button bindings on any of these buttons. Once you've done that and it's completely clear, you can minimize that software and not have to worry about it anymore. But it does need to be running in the background for the Stream Deck to function at all, so you can't get away without it, unfortunately. Okay, so here we are back in Spad. Where do we program the Stream Decks? Well, those are in the Panels button on the left. That's the area reserved for things that Spad knows about and has special coverage for, unlike, say, the Controllers panel, which lists all of the USB game controllers that the software can see and lists them as a bunch of buttons and axes. With the Stream Deck, it's a known product that it has direct support for, in the same way as the Pro Switch panel or other SATEC panels or my Open Cockpit's MCP or a whole bunch of other bits of hardware that it actually knows about. So let's go to the programming for the Stream Deck Mini left. Now, you can see two things. Firstly, that it's saying aircraft power off, so I've got it set when the aircraft power is off in the sim to turn off the Stream Deck, so it won't do anything, even though you can see a couple of the buttons are actually mapped. If I were to turn on the power in the sim, then these buttons would suddenly appear. So let me actually do that and watch picture-in-picture. You can see that the buttons have actually come on. That's something Spad can do for you that the Elgato software, for example, can't do. Let's turn the power off again, and again you can see they disappear. But I'd like to be able to program all of this from scratch, so I'm going to change my profiles. So I'm going to switch to my extra profile, which is empty and has no bindings, as you can see, so we can start from scratch. Okay. Now, you should be familiar with the concept of events and actions in Spad.next, and you understand that events are things which can be triggered by different triggers, whether it's pressing a button, flipping a switch, an event happening in the background, or a scripted event, such as, for example, examining a SimConnect value, and when that value changes, firing an event. And unsurprisingly, the model is extended for the Stream Deck, but it is a little bit stretched, shall we say, as a model, because events don't really cover the idea of creating an image or a display for a button. So they have shoehorned it in a little bit to this thing which is called default data. Now, the default data event is a special event. You can't delete it, you can't add a new one. There is basically a new UI for that, and that allows you to configure the default state of the button, what it will look like and what it will say until you start performing events on it. So the button is made up of 3 layers, and each of these layers does a slightly different job. So the background layer is there just to provide a background color. It doesn't do anything else. You can select a color, so if I pick a nice red and say OK, you can see on the picture-in-picture that the button has indeed gone red. And if I go back to transparent, of course, then it goes back to being empty. Anything else will display on top of that background, so it depends on whether what you're displaying on top actually has any transparency, or if it's text that doesn't fill the whole box, and then you will see the background bleeding through. You can add an additional background layer if you want to, but only one background layer at a time will ever show, so it's a little bit pointless, so I wouldn't worry about that. The next layer up is an image layer, and by default this is just given no name. I don't know why it's not given the default name. And as it sounds, this is a place where you can put images, and the images can be any size that you like, but the actual size of the button is 80 by 80 pixels, so anything bigger than 80 by 80 pixels will stretch outside the button unless you choose to scale it down. And to be honest, scaling a larger image down to 80 by 80 will not give you a great result, so I'd suggest that you prepare images that are the right size in whatever image editing software you have. You can also add an image that is less than 80 by 80 and won't fill the entirety of the button, and you can change its X and Y position and the width and height here. And you can also determine what Spad will do if you give it an image which is not the right size or is too large, by either stretching it or resizing it, maintaining the aspect ratio, or taking no action. Lastly, there is the concept of distortion. Now, we're going to talk about that in more detail later, but basically it lets you do some basic animation of an image based on values that you can get from the sim, or more specifically expressions. Now, expressions is not really something I have the time to go through in any great detail in this video. It would deserve a video all of its own, and we'll use it only in the simplest way later on. But again, there are videos that you can go and watch on the Spad.next channel that will explain more about the expression format. Okay, so how do you go and pick an image? Well, you click on the three dots and it gives you this dialog, which gives you options between images that you've stored in your profile. To do that, you have to import an image from disk, or images that are local. So these are images which you've placed in a specific folder within the Spad.next profiles folder, the location of which I will display on the screen right now. Or you can go with Spad's own online collection of button images, which is pretty extensive, and that's what we use for our demo in a moment. And as you can see, they're in a bunch of different categories, including buttons that are specifically for particular aircraft. So if you really want an H-jet button, you can find it here. And then the final layer type is the text layer, and as it sounds, the text layer is where you put text. So you can have text, any string, in any foreground and background color you like, with any font that you like that's installed on your machine, any font size and any font style, and you can shift the position so that it's elsewhere on the button if you don't want it centered, and you can give it a different width and height if you can't quite fit it into the space available. And you can have more than one text layer, so you can layer different text labels on top of each other. This can be handy if you want to change some of the text when an event happens but not the rest of the text, so you can separate it into two labels. And equally, you can have multiple image layers as well. If you click the plus button here, you get the option to add new layers. You might, for example, want to nest an image inside an image, or have an image partially covering another image. Those are potential use cases. In reality, I've never used anything other than these three default layers, and to be honest, you probably won't need to either, but it's there if you want it. So let's just cancel out of that for the moment. I think the first thing we should do is create a very simple demo button that demonstrates how to use text and background color to give you a relatively simple indicator of the state of something in the sim. And for that, we're going to manipulate the master battery switch. So let's edit this first of all. Background layer, by default, we're going to be power off. So I want to pick a color that represents power off, and I generally go for dark red. This is just a pick list for predefined colors. You can put in your own hex values if you like, or you can pick from the palette up here. Whichever works for you is fine. So I'll say OK on that. So you can see that the button has gone dark red now, and that indicates the off state. And then we're going to want to use a green color to indicate the on state. Now I appreciate that's not 100% inclusive for colorblind people, so you might want to add additional text labeling for that, and we can see how we could do that in a minute. But I do want to have a text layer, so I'm going to add some text, and that text is just going to say battery. And for the moment, I'm perfectly happy with it being in the middle of the button. I'm going to make it bold, but I'll leave it the size and font that it is. Oh yeah, that's a little bit too large, so take it down 1 point, and now it fits on the button quite nicely. And again, you can see that it has appeared on the button, and now we have white text on a red background. So that's the default state of the button. Now we need to do some things with it. So Let's first add an event that fires when the button itself is pressed. That's going to flip the value of the master battery switch. So let's change a data value, and I believe it's electrical master battery. Yeah, electrical master battery. There we go. And rather than just setting it, because I then need two events, I'm going to increment it. I'm going to increment it by 1. Then I'm going to put a limit on, say min 0, max 1, and roll over. What that means is that every time I press the button, it's going to go 0 to 1, and then it's going to back to 0, then to 1, then back to 0, then back to 1. So it's basically going to flip state. And it's that's a simple way of doing that on a single action, which I quite like. So whenever we press the button, the electrical master battery value will increment, which will cause the battery to go on and off in the sim. Then we need to change the color of the background when that happens. So for this we're going to need a scripted event. We're going to add a condition that it will fire on, and that condition is going to be on the value of the electrical master battery. And if it is 1, so if it's on, we're going to add an action to change a color, and we're going to change the color of the background layer, not the text layer, that's important, and the background scope, also important, and then we'll pick the color, and that color is going to be the dark green, which I quite like. And we're not going to flash, it doesn't need to flash at all. So when electrical master battery turns to 1, then the background should change to green. And then equally, because it won't just go back to the red when it stops being 1, we're going to need to add another scripted event, which is conditional on the electrical master battery being 0, and that is going to change the color of the background layer back to dark red. Now if anybody knows a good way to have it automatically revert to default, I'd love to know about that, but I suspect if you knew how to do that, you probably would be watching this video. So okay, we'll say OK on that one, and then we'll save the profile. So now we should have a button that works. So let's just pop into the sim for a second, and you can see the master battery switch. It's on the left there, it's the first of the red switches, and then you can see in picture I'm going to press this button and we will see what happens. So I press the button, the switch has flipped, the battery's gone on, the background of the button has changed to green, and the text has stayed the same, and if I press it again, then it goes off. So that's a good start. Now let's try adding a text indication as well, which is not particularly difficult. So what I'm going to do is, in the default data, in the text layer, I'm going to move this text caption up a bit. Do that by reducing the Y value to there, and then actually I'm going to add another text layer, and this one I'm not going to give it a fancy name, but this is basically the status layer. So by default the status is going to be off. I'm going to leave it in the font that it is, and then I'm going to add to the scripted event some more actions. So we're going to change a label, and we're going to go with the text layer 3, and we're going to change the text to on when it's on, and equally we are going to change the text to off when it goes off again. Say OK, and save it, and again we will demonstrate that working. So keep an eye on the picture in picture, goes on, the colour has changed and the label has changed, goes off, the colour has changed back and the label has changed back. So that's two examples of a pretty simple button based just on text and colour, and most of the things that I do with the Stream Deck are very similar to that. So that's largely all that I need. But obviously you want to see how to do a button using images. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of these events, then I'm going to paste them onto button 2, which will basically make it a clone of the original button. Then what we're going to do is We're going to remove that second text layer because we don't need it, and in fact I'm going to remove that text layer because we won't need it, and I'm going to add an image, and I'm going to pick that from the online collection. I'm going to go for buttons, systems, electrical, and here is the battery on, battery off images for that particular collection. So we're going to start with battery off. That'll be the default state. So I've selected that image now. You can see it's displaying on the button already, and I'm not going to do any kind of distortion or change to it. It can just go as it is. I'm leaving the button pressed action because that can do the same thing, and here I need to change these actions. So this is when it goes on, and when it goes on we're going to change the image, and let's make sure we've picked the right button. Yes, we have. And then we'll select the image, and again buttons, systems, electrical, and this time we want battery on, and then this one will delete the actions again, and we'll add a change image action to go back to the off state. And we'll save that. So now you can see that we've got the button displaying the image caption, and if I press it then the caption changes to on, and again the events are still working in the sim. If I press it again it changes to off. So that's a simple example of using an image or a pair of images to indicate the changing state of a button, and that's another way that you can do simple buttons. So why don't we do one more demo, and that's going to be a little bit different. I want to demonstrate how the image rotation works. So let's first of all edit the default data, and I need to go and pick an image which will let us demonstrate this rotation capability. So I'm going to go to the other selection. I'm going to pick this image here, which is going to be used to represent the magnetic compass heading of the aircraft, and just to make sure bad things don't happen, I'm going to give it a meaningful name. We'll call that compass heading, and then down here in the distortion mode I'm going to set distortion to rotate, and I'm going to give it an expression based on some data, and that data is going to be the magnetic compass in degrees, and it will be truncated to the nearest whole number. Also need to remember to set the center of the rotation to the center of the image, otherwise it will rotate off center and will look pretty terrible. And we'll say OK to that. So you can see that the image has actually rotated to the left to point to the direction that we're currently headed in, which is almost west. And you can see that's the case on the button. However, you can also see some black background seeping in around the edges, and that's because it's a square image that is only as large as the button top, and so as it rotates, parts of it will disappear off the side and be replaced with the transparent background. So at this point what we can do to fix that is paste in the color value of that particular green. One quick trip into Paint later, and I can paste that in, and I just need to press return to have it add in the alpha value as well. So there is the same green value as the button background, and I'll say OK to that, and as you can see the whole thing is now solid. So when I move the aircraft around to different headings, you should see that button animating. So let's try that and make sure that it actually works. So with the engine side and the rudder full left, I'm going to apply a little bit of power, and this aircraft will spin quite effectively on its axis, and you can see in the picture that the magnetic compass value is changing and the image is animating in real time. Let's stop roughly north facing. There we go. So one other thing we could do to this then is give ourselves something when the button is pressed. So when the button is pressed, I'm going to change data value, and I'm going to go for heading lock direction. So again, that's degrees. That's for the autopilot. I'm going to set that to the magnetic compass value. And that will sync the autopilot heading with wherever we actually happen to be. So, okay, so if I press the button, it should sync the heading and the current direction. They are synced at the moment, so let's just spin the aircraft around a bit more till we're about south facing. There you go. And then we'll press the button, and you can see that the heading lock has synced. So that works as well. Okay. So there you go. That's 3 different kinds of buttons that you can create using text and images and then animated images, and that will hopefully give you some good pointers as to how you can get started with Stream Deck and Spad.next. So, as always, I will say thank you for watching, and if you liked the video, it would help if you click the like button. If you disliked it, it will help me at least if you click the dislike button. And if you have any questions or comments, then please put them in the comments below. I'll try to answer any questions as quickly as I can. And if you'd like to subscribe to the channel, then of course I would welcome that, but please do click the little bell icon so that you know when I publish a video. And with all that said, I would look forward to seeing you back on the channel very soon.